Let's put it this way. A lot of rich people all of a sudden started to conveniently have contact with, ghosts and so forth.
In today's video, we sit down with author, researcher Cynthia Chung and discuss topics on the Knights of Malta, fascism, mind control, and secret societies.
So a lot of these authors were actually trained in intelligence, doing espionage while they were writing these books. Capri is known as the cult center. The CIA had a whole bunch of people who are Knights of Malta. The most notorious director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, the men working closely around him were associated with the Knights of Malta.
Yo, what up? It's Donut, and tuning into all your Illuminati news. And we are here with Cynthia Chung. I am so grateful that you're here. I'm such a huge fan. I got your book right here. I'm going to ask you just a ton of questions, just a ton of topics. Your husband, Matt Arrett, my audience already knows I'm just a huge fan. And I want to just talk about so many topics. But first, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm a little stressed out, but because I overwork, and we were talking a little bit about that. But this is fun for me. So right now, all the stress is leaving, even though we're going to be talking about some stressful topics. And this is what I really enjoy about your presentations. You bring up, I don't want to say it wrong, but and so does your husband, the beautiful, the truth, ode to joy. And stuff like that. So focusing on also the good. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
We have a nonprofit called the Rising Tide Foundation. And my background is more in, I guess you could say, in an interest to classical literature. And for me, I feel that that's really studying philosophy in terms of the Platonic school of philosophy and classical literature is really where I come from in the research that I do now in, and even just like Freemasonry topics or the mafia or Nazis or whatnot. We're especially realizing more and more as we look into the lives of these authors that they were actually really involved in politics. Even like classical composers like Mozart was actually a really political person. He was censored in Vienna. That's why he had to do his operas in Italy, because they were too politically critical of the system. So even Matt right now, he's doing a wonderful series on Poe. Wow, you've got a lot set up here. Holy cow.
Well, I'm going to be going on the fly.
Wow, you're fast. You're really fast. But yeah, Matt's doing a great series right now on Edgar Poe. And who knew that Poe was also really in high level espionage. So was James Fenimore Cooper, who I think most people would know as the author for The Last Mohicans. So a lot of these authors were actually trained in intelligence and were actually doing espionage while they were writing these books. It definitely makes sense now that I look back on it that I was able to actually learn a lot from studying these stories, which were not just stories for fun, but were really stories to teach us and warn us about where we were headed in the future if we allowed certain things to continue to happen.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And I know that Gosselin just put out a new article which I read through, and I was doing my best to explain how the Renaissance, that was like a type of thinking that ignited the Renaissance. And now we're getting pushed into these mushroom cults, this UFO hidden hand cults. All that is leading to the thinking changing just a little bit, like to more of like a Gnostic type of mysticism thinking, which just a little change of thinking alters the direction. It's not easy to really kind of simplify, but is that kind of what's going on with these stories?
Yeah, again, this is what Matt is actually researching on for even Harry Houdini and Poe, because at the time, the seances were becoming really popular in the 19th century, talking to spirits, talking to ghosts, this sort of thing. It was a complete kind of takeover. Let's put it this way. A lot of rich people all of a sudden started to conveniently have contact, like magical experiences or contact with, ghosts and so forth. And it was really easy to manipulate people if they thought that they had, a spiritual experience like this from a seance or whatever. And, a lot of these seances have been shown now to have been frauds. There's been a lot of exposure to that. Harry Houdini was actually at the forefront of that. He was known to challenge people saying like, hey, do any kind of trick or any kind of phenomenon you think, like even at a seance type thing or a haunted house, and invite me and I'll tell you how they did it. And he never failed at solving one of those kinds of situations. He always proved at the end that it was a human-made situation. And Friedrich Schiller actually wrote The Ghost Seer too, which is I did a class and a paper on this. This is a really good piece of fiction just to show how intelligence works to play games like magic tricks on people in order to control them. Because once you start to believe in things that there's no way that you can use human reason, there's no way that you can use your mind to know whether it's true or not, you're someone else's tool. And that's what people have to understand. That's why they love this whole thing of like the spiritual, and not to say that some people don't even believe in it. Apparently Arthur Conan Doyle had his own brand that he believed in. But again, whose tool was he ultimately as well? When you can't actually decide for yourself, have a form of judgment for yourself, there's no way of you judging the path that you're on and that you'll continue to be on. And that's what me and Matt now call when someone has all of these, all of a sudden, things that are happening to them, and they're clearly an influential person. They're someone who has a lot of money. They have a network and everything. And it's always these kinds of people, typically, that it happens to. You don't have poor people, normal, average people who have these ghost seer experiences. We call them, a ghost seered person, after what Schiller brilliantly goes over how that this person got deconstructed and then rebuilt to be a fanatic of their creation in ideology.
Wow. Yeah, like you got the head Ghostbusters guy that got that like that Pyramid Bass Pro Shop in Memphis. Then you got all these people on the mainstream talking about how aliens are visiting them for them to go to a website, probably to purchase their like Patreon or something like that. And when you bring up Schiller, and also, I'm not sure if you've seen Werner Herzog's film, but going into the seances, he did a film called Invincible.
Oh, I haven't seen that. That looks super interesting, though.
It's connected to how the National Socialists were going to these seances, and it's a really good film. I liked it. He's one of my favorite directors. But Schiller, was it him that I heard in your presentation that wrote the Ode to Freedom?
Yeah, the poem. Exactly. Wow. Yes, exactly. Beethoven based his Ode to Joy off of Schiller's poem. And at the time, it was considered too controversial for him to say Ode to Freedom. See, that's how censored things were. And, Germany wasn't a country. The German people under the Congress of Vienna, they were not allowed to talk about certain things, write about certain things. A lot of these people ended up leaving and going to the United States, actually. They became, there was a brain drain from Germany because all of the smartest minds were not allowed to teach these classical ideas. So the United States really benefited actually from a lot of the German immigrants who came here and brought over the classical teachings. But yeah, even something like Ode to Freedom was considered too controversial. You had to change certain words.
Oh man. And also I just see this because I like to look into the social engineering, because I was so socially engineered through MTV. I grew up on MTV. And the music you were breaking down in one of your Rising Tide Foundation presentations, that was incredible, going into the repetition of music, because all the music that is on the radio or used for commercials to sell and buy products, always repetitive. Ode to Joy, Ode to Freedom. I look into kind of the schizo stuff with the the numerology, but then it does play a huge role. Like Symphony 9, I believe it was Beethoven's last symphony, and 9 is considered a completion number. John Lennon obsessed with the number 9. So I'm always looking into all that stuff.
Yeah, and
But
they've totally tried to take over the symphony number 9. So you notice that it's always played in like really messed up contexts, like Clockwork Orange, or in a lot of movies. Like Clockwork Orange actually was like, I have only seen that movie once, and it's still, when I hear a certain section, I always think of the messed up scene where they break into that person's house and like they murder the people after torturing them and everything. And they play music like Beethoven or Bach. They play Bach often for Nazi scenes. There's also, a Nazi brainwashing scene in Clockwork Orange. They play Beethoven's Ode to Joy again during that. And then, Bach is almost very often played for Nazi scenes where Nazis are doing terrible things to people. They're playing Bach's music. And it's not a coincidence that they do this, because they want you to associate now classical music as like crazy, evil, maybe cultured, intelligent people, but they're always like, the creepy oligarchs living in their creepy castles who listen to that. That's not the music of the people.
Right. And I was listening to Ode to Joy yesterday, trying to get out of my malaise of my discontents in society. And I really did enjoy it. I have been looking into Beethoven, studying classical music and finding different classical artists that I do like. It's so much different than the music that we hear today. Just to add on top, I wanted to add on top to your research, Michael Moore, who I'm not a fan of his politics, but I'll give him credit that he's a great propagandist for, anti-freedom. I would say that, my own opinion. But he did that with the song, and it wasn't just him. Many people have done it after him with that song about like humanity, and then he would mix it with all the violence. So he's doing it as well with that what a wonderful world, or whatever, that song.
Oh, really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Louis Armstrong.
Yeah.
So he mixed this in his film Bowling for Columbine, and it's just like this lovely song. But so whenever I hear it, I don't think it's a good song. I'm like, this is a terrible song.
Oh, yeah, I saw that movie Bowling for Columbine, but it didn't do that, because I guess I had already listened to that song so many times before. I saw the movie, so I was like more immunized. Whereas with the Ode to Joy, Clockwork Orange, I hadn't really listened to that song yet, and it matters, right? So your first patterning, the first time you hear a song, it will tend to stick with you more. Yeah, it's really hard to get out of that once you're taken in by it.
Yeah, I watched Clockwork Orange when I was 10 years old.
Well, there you go. See, yeah, I watched it when I was pretty young too, and I didn't know Ode to Joy. Now, though, I can listen to Ode to Joy when the whole chorus, and like there's been the largest chorus that I know of, it's like 10,000 people in, I think it was Japan. It's incredible. And every time the whole chorus gets in, that's supposed to be the voice of the people. So there's this beautiful like political statement of like, we're going to resist tyranny in the song. When everyone's voice comes in, it's super moving, and I cry almost every single time. There's also a part in Mozart's Requiem where it's et lux perpetua, like the light forever shines sort of thing. And the way it's sung, because I've been even in a chorus singing this, and you just break down crying because it's such a beautiful statement. And when you're singing in the chorus, you really do feel like it's this like, it is a political statement, but it's a political statement to refuse to accept being treated in the ugly, oppressive way that we are treated, and to acknowledge that we actually have something really sacred within us.
I like the
there's a Nintendo game. Oh,
I guess there's a video game. I don't know if it's true or not. But speaking of, what I really want to dive into is some secret society stuff, the Knights of Malta stuff. And Beethoven, I know he was trained by Illuminati members when he was a kid. I'm not sure if you dug into that at all. It's very fascinating stuff, but it reminds me of the French Revolution and what you talked about, that these the beginnings of something with Antoinette, the images that you show on your Substack. Everybody go subscribe to Cynthia Chung's Substack. Absolutely incredible. I'm enjoying it so much. It's just so much fun learning, and you do all the hard work for us. So I don't, it's easy. I get to just read it. I don't have to, but where was I going with that? Mozart, Illuminati. Oh yeah, secret societies. I wanted to bring up the Knights of Malta because I've been, okay, I'm jumping all over the place. That's why I record it, because I'll edit my hiccup. The French Revolution started off as a good cause, then it gets hijacked, and then it becomes the reign of terror. And so we see a lot of these movements still happening today. Once we study history, we could just be like, yo, look what's going on right now. Like, Twitter is manufacturing hate, or social media is manufacturing division and divisiveness. It's like absolutely we can see these different groups being formed, but it goes back to these hidden hands and these secret societies operating huge movements, revolutions, wars, whatever it is, which brings me into, I like to talk about the Order of Malta, because they still sit at the UN today. They're way more ancient than the Illuminati.
Yeah, the more that I do research, and Matt Ehret is my husband, and we're constantly talking with each other, so we're always kind of overlapping with each other, not even necessarily intending to. But it really does seem, the more we look into things, that there has been a really long battle. It is almost like this epic Hollywood movie. It's just like, it is quite something that there does seem to be a human movement and an anti-human movement that has been going on for centuries. And this anti-human movement, it has been based in mystery cults that, go back to Babylon. But, I would say even further back than that, very much kind of situated a real presence by the time of Babylon. A lot of this, weird satanic human sacrifice stuff, children sacrifice stuff, this is not something that's new. It's like something that's really disturbingly old, and it's disturbingly old in the sense that it means that it had to have been carried through in some form of teaching over centuries. It really does seem like there was a successful, this is the whole thing too. I again, this might sound out there, but there's the Old Testament and then there's the New Testament, and I will get into the Knights of Malta in a second. But the Old Testament is really different from the New Testament. The Old Testament is a different world, where there are sacrifices that are happening, although like Abraham is considered the last necessary sacrifice. But, it's not made clear in the Old Testament should they have ever happened, to begin with. But clearly this was a thing that was going on during the time. And there was a sort of intervention, it seems, with Christianity being one of them, that the human sacrifices were going to stop, and the idols, the idolizing was also going to stop. And these were some of the central things for the mystery cults. And so they had to kind of go underground at a certain point, and there seems to be a lot of animosity because it was extremely successful, how I regard it, as a crazy political cultural intervention. It was like so massively successful, but those things were never purged. We even are now finding that there's all of these underground Mithraims for the Mithraic mystery cult. That is one of the big ones, and none of them are like completely outside of themselves, right? They all are kind of connected to each other in one form, but they take on different kinds of strategies, you can say, in terms of their approach to things. But I would say that they're not really in opposition in terms of an overall ideology. But we've discovered a whole bunch of Mithraims even now recently underground. And there's stuff like that the Vatican is also connected with. So it's very unsettling to realize that this thing has been there for a very long time, and it kind of makes you realize how serious of a problem we have today. And if people do get kind of sucked into this, as you were saying before, just going into spiritual land of like ghosts and spirits or like aliens or like, and everything just doesn't have to have reason to it, you really do open the doors to this sort of thing even more, because who are you to say anything? And oftentimes a judgment of good or bad even gets confused, and they try to confuse it more and more to the point where, you know, there really isn't a differentiation at the end of the day. If you're a good enough, you know, sophist, if you're a good enough arguer, you can confuse a person who hasn't thought about these things enough. In the case of the Knights of Malta, funny enough, I started to look into this. Well, I knew, first of all, that the CIA had a whole bunch of people who are Knights of Malta people, including the director, the most notorious director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, but a lot of the men working closely around him were associated with the Knights of Malta. And I was also doing research with Gladio. The book that you showed goes over a lot of Gladio work. I'm planning on doing a volume 2 that's going to go into Vatican Gladio and other elements of Gladio that I didn't touch in this first book. But Gladio was something that basically was an underground terrorist unit that was basically being supported by the CIA, the MI6, MI5, and Nazis, because they're all, at the end of the day, playing for the same side. And, you know, we can get into what exactly were they fighting maybe later on. But the point being is that Gladio has as its symbol the Crusader sword, and the Knights of Malta have the Crusader sword as their symbol. And for me, that's kind of like that is a big gap area for me, is like the Crusader period. It's not my forte in terms of history and research, but just going further into trying to understand Vatican Gladio, I ended up obviously looking into the Crusader connection more and realizing that, yeah, the Knights of Malta, which was considered the modern continuation of the Knights Hospitaller, the Templars, you know, these Freemasonic organizations. There's a Malta Freemasonry. It was one of the first in terms of modern Freemasonry that came in the 1700s when they revived it, but revamped. It's, again, this modern Freemasonry is totally connected to what also is controlling the Knights of Malta. And if you look for, this is going to sound, it's because it's a lot of information, but I do go over it, I hope, in a much more comprehensive way in my writing. But it's a huge, you know, amount of history to cover in a discussion. So I'll try to summarize it as clearly as possible. But the Knights of Malta and the Templars, and I realized that the origins of the mafia were all tied to the Benedictine orders, and the Jesuits are also tied to the Benedictine orders. So now we have one source for a whole bunch of things. And the Benedictine orders, Matt knows more about this, I have to still look into this more, is tied into the whole like cult of Sybil and Mithra stuff as well. And the Benedictine order is a militant Catholic order. It's not to say that the Vatican Church was like always bad or something, but there clearly was an attack on the Vatican to basically take over it slowly over time. And I think at this point, it's not looking great. And it's the same sort of process that was happening with the United States over a shorter amount of time. But you had, you know, good people in the United States who had a massive success in the founding of the United States on pro-human principles. But they always had, you know, traitors in their midst. And if you didn't stay ever vigilant, as Benjamin Franklin said, you have a republic if you can keep it, because the fight is a very long fight and people have to be aware of what exactly they're fighting. If you're not even aware that this thing exists, how are you supposed to recognize it when you see it? And that's the whole thing with the French Revolution, because Napoleon Bonaparte plays a massive role too and King Louis XIV of France, who was, you know, a little bit before Napoleon, played massive roles in modern Freemasonry and in turning it into what it has become in its modern form. But the French Revolution was supposed to be the next American Revolution. It was supposed to be, you know, for a republic and not necessarily like against monarchy. Like have to slaughter all of the monarchs or aristocrats. That wasn't what they wanted. In the case of the Americans, they had to fight the British because the British, put them in that situation. But in France, there was a possibility of diplomacy and talks, and there was a lot of aristocrats that were in support of this, like the scientist Lavoisier. But again, like the average person was not very well educated, and they got totally duped, where one of the slogans was, "We don't need scientists." And France was at the head of scientific achievement in Europe for like a few centuries, because France was the first nation state. And they had the best universities, and the best thinkers would travel to France to learn in various fields within the sciences. And that just shows how crazy the French Revolution was that they even said the scientists were the enemy. So yeah, this kind of Jacobin, chaotic rule, like the rule of the people, gets confused, that it's like the rule of the people means the people get whatever the people want. That's not what any kind of organized system should ever do, because that's a mob.
Yeah, it's the demo mob. Yeah.
And so that's why they descended into the Reign of Terror, and there was over 40,000 executions by guillotine. It was almost like an endless lineup to the guillotine. They just kept lopping people's heads off for years.
And we still see that today. You wrote about Bruce and how he also did some crazy stuff, and then said that he changed his hearts after he chopped the heads off and the other wild stuff. But we see this even with ISIS chopping off heads. Like, we just see it like nothing changes. It's like the same story over history, the same kind of tactics and whatnot.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you're bringing up for people that don't know. Robert the Bruce played, it seems, a central role in what would become modern Freemasonry, because I believe that there were good Freemasons, and you have to differentiate the Freemasons from before the modern time, which like came in the 1700s, and they came with a whole set of like new rules and things like this. And I think that there were good Freemasons and there were bad Freemasons, but there was clearly something that had to do also with great achievements. Architectural were like the most noticeable ones, but there was clearly something, I think, that was good, like Brunelleschi, for instance. There was a lot. There's still, to this day, we don't know how the dome for the Santa Maria del Fiore, the dome in Florence Cathedral, is built. It's the largest Mason-built dome, and Da Vinci actually was young enough to be a student to help craft the Golden Globe on top of the dome. And that was a huge accomplishment for the Italian people, the Florentines, because the plague had hit Italy. And this was actually a massive science driver project. And it made people realize, like, we can achieve great things with our mind. It was a very important accomplishment. And to this day, Florence has a rule where you can't have buildings to a certain height, so you can always see the dome. It was a really good project to motivate people to achieve great things instead of giving up. But then with modern Freemasonry, there seems to be something really bad. And there were good people, I think, who were trying to intervene and infiltrate, but it was, I think, overall not a good thing. And the way the story goes, that C.W. Heckthorn brings up in his book, The Secret Societies of All Ages, he brings up the very interesting thesis that when the Templars were supposed to have been obliterated, they actually went to Scotland, and Robert the Bruce, the notorious traitor of William Wallace, if anyone's seen Braveheart with Mel Gibson, it's a true story, and it was a massive Scottish independence movement against the British colonialists, and Robert the Bruce betrayed William Wallace, and William Wallace died a horrific death publicly, because the British really hated him, because he would have probably succeeded if he hadn't been betrayed by Robert the Bruce. And then that guy all of a sudden changes his mind, as you were bringing up, and he's like, oh, you know what? No, maybe we should have Scottish independence. And he leads a successful Scottish independence. But what Heckthorn is bringing up is that he thinks that the Templars actually went into Scotland and were working with Robert the Bruce networks. Because if you look at what actually happened in Scotland, the oligarchs got stronger in Scotland after the so-called independence movement, and they were all doing the bidding of the British Empire anyway. But it seems that this was a period where the Templars, which was a French, institution, was melded with what would become known as the Scottish Rite. And there's this whole story too with like the Rose Croix, which people, even Heckhorn says, oh, it has nothing to do with the Rosicrucians. I don't know about that yet. I have to do more work, but I'm thinking it does. And the Rosicrucians, I think, ultimately will play a big role in the story, but I don't know enough yet. But this is, it seems, a story of how the Scottish Rite kind of became very embedded into what was supposed to be like a French masonry thing. And at first they were supposed to, this new form of Scottish Rite, which had different rules and a different philosophy, because there was a battle, between the two lodges. They tried to introduce it into Britain, and Britain refused it, but they were successful and they brought it into France. And that was, I think, largely under Louis XIV. That they were able to do that, and his brother played a very big role in this, which I go over in my most recent paper that's up on my Substack right now.
And it's absolutely incredible. Just everybody gotta go subscribe to Cynthia's Substack. She goes over so many topics, but I am definitely fascinated right now with the French connections, the Knights of Malta, Scottish Rite, and the Mafia Brotherhoods. I got all those links down below. Make sure to go subscribe. Please continue.
Yeah, and I don't know like where we want to go with this, but like this exactly ties into what France was also battling with its French Revolution, because at that point, with King Louis XIV having started these weird mystery cults again, and King Louis XIV is known as the Sun King. And if you know anything about, the cult of Mithra, I also have been finding that, because I've done work on Ascona for people who know about this, and the counterculture movement with the Esalen Institute and all this. Martin Green is someone who wrote a book called Children of the Sun. The German word is Sonnenkinder. And a lot of these people in the 20th century, proto-fascists, and a lot of them became actual fascists, they were all called sun worshippers. So you see like a theme with all of this of like Helios, which is another sun god, Apollo. In the case of King Louis XIV, he was very clearly worshiping Apollo. But I mean, there isn't really a difference, I find, at the end of the day. It kind of tells you, and right, there's a connection too with Tiberius in Capri as well. This is all connecting as well to the mystery cults of Tiberius's time in Rome, because the Knights of Malta, they were created near Capri in Amalfi. Capri is just right off the coast from Amalfi in Italy. The origination of the Neapolitan mafia, which was the second mafia. We have the first mafia brotherhood is Garduna in Spain, and then you have the second, which is a direct connection to the one in Spain, was in Naples, right by Amalfi. So all of these things, again, they're all happening within a very close proximity of each other. Capri is known as like the cult center to this day. Anyone who visits Capri, who's a big name, chances are they're not doing anything very good there, but it has a very old cult center that has a Sibyl and Mithra connections and so forth. So it's very clear, just looking into it a little bit, what King Louis XIV was a part of. And he really, unfortunately, because there's a lot of good things going on in France, as I was saying, they were leaders in the scientific endeavors, and they had the École Polytechnique was like a massive science driver program for Europe, because when you get one of these things, other people want to learn and bring it back to where they live. So it really spreads, and it's a very positive form of sharing ideas. So King Louis XIV, I think, introduced something very nefarious into France at this point. Napoleon, which I still have to do more research because I'm not yet at that point in my series, but he definitely, along with his brothers, have connections as well to continuing the Freemasonry. And one of his, I think it was his nephew, he was one of the original founders of the FBI in the United States.
Wow, Napoleon Bonaparte?
Yeah, one of his nephews, when he's his like younger nephews or like relatives. The Bonaparte family continue to play a major role in a whole bunch of things. I guess it wouldn't be his nephew, though. It'd be someone younger. But anyway, a close relation. Bonaparte is the last name of the person. Would also be tasked with creating the FBI. And the mafia is basically, you can say, the one of the servants to this whole thing, which we haven't really gotten into that because the subject is so big, but that is actually something I discuss with a lot more focus in the series. And it seems that the mafia had always been connected to this from its very creation. The first mafia brotherhood, the Garduna, were in service to the Spanish Inquisition for 100 years. And that's where they got all of their power from, was from being servants to the Spanish Inquisition. And that was the first brotherhood. And this author, David Leon Chandler, who wrote Brothers in Blood, he makes a very good case. He's not the only one to bring this forward. There have been other historians who said that the Garduna Brotherhood in Spain directly were the model, if not even had members. It seemed like it was all under King Ferdinand II of Spain, who created the Spanish Inquisition, that he might have been implicated also for the Neapolitan mafia that came off right beside Amalfi, the Knights of Malta original headquarters. It seems the Garduna actually physically had people go over to Italy because it was Spanish domain at the time. Italy was Spain's dominion, and they set up the Camorra Mafia Brotherhood. And then later on, you would have the Sicilian Mafia Brotherhood that would continue the same types of specific initiation rites of the Mafia Brotherhood that were very masonry connected, but actually more so, it seems all of these things are using the same kind of structure from the Benedictine order. And there were actually, the Benedictine order was responsible for the Templar. For the Knights of Malta, it was a Benedictine monk who created the Knights of Malta, which was supposed to be the continuation of the Knights Hospitaller. And there were two institutions too in Spain. I forgot now the names of them, that were also created from the Benedictine Militant Order. So the Benedictine Militant Order is like really important in this. I will definitely look into it more, but this is all still kind of new for me as well in my research. So I don't have all of the answers.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's wild, just the connections. Like, the Spanish Inquisition took place, and the Illuminabratos, where the Illuminati kind of got the same name, Illuminated. Ignatius Loyola was a member of it, and he escaped, and then he went on to create the Jesuits. And so there's like so many connections. Like myself, I think it is definitely a lifelong journey of study, and we all get so confused. Like, why does the National Socialist use this Knights of Malta logo? They're the New Templars. And then you even got the Rothschilds use the Knights of Malta or Epstein. Why are they part of a Catholic order? Or on the back of the dollar dime, you got the fasces symbol. So all these different connections of if World War II was about the white race, then how come Japanese, Muslim, Arab all were in line if it was only about the white race? So there's all these questions that don't make any sense in history. And we're about to come up on the 33rd Summer Olympics. We got 33 hurricanes coming. Biden got a 33% approval rating for the 47th president. So I'm always looking at numbers and symbols, and you bringing up the rose symbol. I just found this out by watching one of your interviews that you did on your on Operation Gladio and your book. Highly recommend everybody go grab all of Cynthia's books. I'm still working on reading this, but I definitely got some questions on NATO. The wind rose, because this whole thing, the Rosicrucians, the wind rose, the War of the Roses, the rose line in France, the algo lines, the blood lines, the wind rose. The rose is a symbol for socialism with the fist. And the wind rose has 32 spokes on it, just like the Jesuits has the 32 spokes on it, or even in today time, Miami Dolphins got 32. But I'm from Vegas, so the 32nd floor, this was like the worst event in America, and it was on the 32nd floor. The first lodge in Vegas is the 32nd Lodge. Beyonce got her 32 awards with 88 nominations. That's a National Socialist symbol too, the 88. So this is where it gets so confusing, is you got this Anglo-American establishment creating the Muslim Brotherhood, but also creating Israel as well. Queen Elizabeth related to Muhammad. I've been looking at this stuff for a while. And I also like to notate that I'm Jewish too. So like I've been looking at stuff through my own lens, which kind of breaks me free from some things, but also it limits me also. It's very confusing. It's very confusing, but it seems like we're getting to it.
Well, I think, yeah, that was a good point. And, you know, like that picture of the guy with the big white hat that was shaking the hand of Hitler was Haj Amin. And Haj Amin, he was, the British, of course, created a position called the Mufti of Jerusalem. And he was the Mufti of Jerusalem, which he was placed there by the British. And, you know, the British also created a position of the Mufti for in Egypt. I forgot now the exact name, but they again created that position for this person. And the Mufti is like, the Mufti of Jerusalem basically speaks for the entire Muslim world. And Haj Amin, who was the Mufti of Jerusalem, was basically saying that it was good for the Arabs to join the Nazis. Now, there's a lot of Arabs that get very upset when this is brought up, because it also has been used to basically say, hey, you don't have a right to get upset about anything or whatever. But I think it's very important that people also realize what this was, because I think that there is a very dangerous attempt to re-invoke some of these past things in all domains. Like, nobody is totally untouched by this, no matter what culture or religion. But it was really big in the Arab world, where there was like promises from the Nazis that they were going to free them from colonialism, which is hilarious because the Nazis got all of their money from the British. So, I mean, again, there's so many layers of like play on this. And that's why it's, of course, people are going to get confused. You have to really do a lot of investigation. And there are people who are considered expendable. You know, at the end of the day, Hitler was expendable. Mussolini was expendable. Haj Amin was expendable. But these people are willing to be the kind of, sorry for my language, but the favorite dog. And there will be people who will do a lot, because like at the same time, like you do get a dominion. In the case of Hitler, he wanted more than that at the end of the day. But Haj Amin looked like he probably would have played the game to a certain extent. But the Arab world was being told, like, hey, if you join the Nazis really just want to free people. They want honest banking. They're for the people, and they're against colonization. But if you look at what the Nazis were doing, it was clearly an imperialistic endeavor. Mussolini himself said to Oswald Mosley, who he was very close to, that he agreed that Africa should be the one big slave plantation to feed Europe. And it was, again, under this League of Nations construct. And again, like, Hitler was supported by British bankers. This is what's so ridiculous. Oswald Mosley was also supported by British bankers, but they're apparently, you know, against corrupt banking. It's such a joke. It wasn't true at all. But they know what the average person gets the average person riled up, especially if the economy isn't doing so well. And people aren't thinking like, but who's actually behind this person? Yeah, there was an agreement that Africa was going to be one big slave plantation, and League of Nations was going to be about 6 empires, which would have the rest of the world as their satrapies. But Britain would be the ultimate empire above all. And so everyone was kind of like agreeing with this sort of hierarchy, and you know, you'll get your palace, you know, you'll get your slaves that you can see until the horizon, but we will still be the ones was governing the universe, the entire globe. And for a lot of people, it's like, okay, that sounds like a great deal. So that was basically it. And that's why you see all of these different ethnicities, because you'll always have, people who are willing to be in service to that. And again, it was jeopardizing the nation state concept, where you have real industrial growth in the sense that industry, in the sense that you're increasing people's living standard, you're increasing people's real wealth, including the mind. You have a proper education system that treats people like human beings that you value and that can actually contribute something useful in the world, which guess what? Yeah, we can all do that. And that we're not slaves. We're not meant to live a life like that. So that was basically the two systems. And again, it's always a pro-human versus an anti-human I think, approach that you can summarize. There will be disagreements on exactly how to do this anti-human approach in certain ways, but at the end of the day, they're all in agreement that we need to have oligarchs, we need to have slaves.
Yes, the master-slave dynamics. And also with NATO, how does NATO tie into all this? Because reading your book, I mean, I'll show just a lot of the slides when I edit it, but you went over how so many members of the National Socialists moved over to NATO. And look, like just the NATO logo, like I'm into symbolism, like this symbol. What's the difference between that symbol and this symbol? It's the same symbol of NATO. I'll just flash it back real quick. But a lot of people moved over to here. It's so, oh my goodness. I love your research. And also another thing that you brought up on here, and I know I'm jumping around, right in the beginning of your book, you do have a Percy Shelley poem, but in the introduction, Snow is Black, it starts with Bertrand Russell, how it goes into mass psychology is going to be important, reframing reality. Mm-hmm. I don't want to forget to bring up Bertrand Russell as well, because we're going through history, but also kind of bring it in today, where we're at today. What are your thoughts on what I do so much out there, NATO, but
no, it's good though. It's a lot of content, but I think that we're speaking in a comprehensive enough way, hopefully. But what you were bringing up, NATO had a lot of former Nazis who were given positions in NATO, like a lot of them right away. And in the case of the Central Command of NATO, I forgot the full long-winded title, but that was a position that was going to be in charge of basically Central and Eastern Europe. That was a position that was held by a former Nazi for like 17 years or more straight. That's very odd, like why would a former Nazi for that entire period, for that part of the world, which was the part that was supposed to be purged. That was the part that even Richard Kalergi created the idea of a pan-Europe. He's the spiritual father of what became the European Union. And his symbol for pan-Europe was the Apollo sun with the Crusader cross. Later on,
there you go.
And then he adds the stars around it. And then the European Union keeps the stars, and then they have the empty space in the middle, but it implicates a hidden Apollo sun Crusader cross, in my opinion.
Wow. And what was that original logo? So I can
Pan Europe. You can say Kalergi Pan Europe.
Okay.
It should be on Wikipedia. So yeah, and he said this. He said it in his autobiography. It is supposed to be the Apollo sun and the Crusader cross. So it's not me imposing that. He said it himself in his own autobiography. Kalergi even said, because his father, I don't know if he said he was a Jesuit, but he went to a Jesuit school. Kalergi also went to a former Jesuit school because, the Jesuits had been purged at the time. I don't know how well they were actually purged, but his father seems to have been an actual high-level Jesuit. He knew something like 17 languages, grew up in many different places, but including one of them was Japan, Richard Coleri is half Japanese. So there was already a lot of setup for things that we would see unfold by the time of World War II, but that happened like many decades beforehand. So his father had written this book where he supposedly his father, who was a anti-Semite, was going to write this book to support anti-Semitism. And then he somehow gets a change of mind doing his research. And he's like, no, you know what? I'm actually a Zionist. I'm pro-Zionism, his father. When you read his book, and then Richard would do an addition to this book. I can't remember the name of the book off of the top of my head, but it's very easy to find on the Wikipedia page of Heinrich Coudenhove. He says that, well, I'm pro-Zionist because I think all of the Jews should leave Europe.
Oh, yeah. Put them in, concentrate them all into one section, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, they were thinking already of doing like, a country in Angola, they would put all the Jews there, which obviously doesn't have enough space, and then Israel or whatever. So that's where they were coming from. And Richard says in his part of the addition to the book, well, there are two types of Jews. There are the Reformed Jews and the unreformed Jews. The unreformed Jews are the ones who continue their Jewish heritage. I think I said that right, the unreformed. And the Reformed Jews are the ones who have assimilated into Christian culture, whatever the frick that means, because they're clearly not real Christians either. They're into Mithra and Richard chooses the Apollo sun. Like there's no reference to Christianity at all in the symbols he's chosen. They say those are the Reformed Jews. So, the Rothschilds, these types of Jews are considered the acceptable Jews because they have assimilated. And he said it's really the Eastern European Jews who are the problems. And that's like about 6 million.
Oh, that's me, I think. I think that's me.
There's 6 million.
That's why I'm stressed out. That's why I'm smoking again. I'm freaked out. I'm like, where do I go? And then
you can come over here. We have an extra room for you if it gets crazy. But
okay. I wouldn't do that to y'all. I'll stay.
Canada's not that safe either.
Yeah, for sure.
We have Chrystia Freeland.
Do you think that there's I don't know if you've seen.
I want to finish. So Richard said there in his book, and this is about maybe 25 years before the Holocaust, that we will have to get these Jews out of Eastern Europe, probably forcefully, because if they don't want to leave willfully. So it was a plan for a very long time. It wasn't something that originated with Hitler for this whole purge. And I mean, it wasn't just about the Jews, because like we were saying, at the end of the day, it was about attacking the nation state. But I think that they really don't like the Judeo-Christian traditions that go against the sort of stuff that they want to bring in terms of, again, the mystery cults. So nowadays, what that means as an unreformed person is if you reject, I'll just say it, like a kind of satanic approach to things at this point, you're an unreformed person. They clearly have gone after traditional heritages, and they just don't like that in general. And usually what that means is that families that continue that, they have a certain kind of teaching that they will continuously teach to their children and their children's children and so forth. So they're not this nice blank slate that the educational system or whatever can just, write whatever they want and the parents will just go along with it. Like the kinds of things that we now accept in our culture that were totally considered bad things like 10 years ago is just shows how much too many parents have failed in having any kind of role in protecting their child and shaping how their child can make proper judgments of right and wrong.
Especially with the iPads, throwing the kid the iPad to get them to stop crying, and then the cartoons got a bunch of wild stuff in it and and all that. Have you seen this coin that circulates, or there's this movie called that everyone I podcast with, like being a conspiracy theorist, always tells me to watch the Europa movie, and then this guy has something called Pan Europa. I wonder if it comes from that. I haven't seen it. Okay. Yeah. Oh man, this is.
I haven't watched that either, but I know it's disturbing how influential that documentary series is, and probably what you just mentioned there. That I think that there is a connection with that.
Yeah, and you know, and we passed the hour mark. Is it cool if we go for another 15 minutes? Kind of wanted to ask just a couple more questions
Yeah, sure.
on because I really enjoy all your content. We talked about a lot of the very very dark stuff. Now, I thought this article when you put it out on gaslighting, I thought we hear a lot about gaslighting, you know, with narcissism on the rise. Here's Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley. Can you just tell us a little bit about gaslighting and why that's very important for, let's say, we're all like me, I was programmed by the television, by MTV.
I am also from the MTV generation. Actually, I wanted to like fit in school, and so I like forced myself to watch MTV because I didn't like it. To just like
That's
kind of
hilarious.
study it like I would as like a zoologist or
I did the
anthropologist.
same thing with Sports Center. I tried to watch Sports Center. I sat down for like a week and I was just like, I don't understand it. And I never watched sports after that.
Yeah. Actually, this I have like more than one version of this on my Through a Glass Darkly, and in another one which has a very similar title. I think it's just Gaslighting: The Psychology of Shaping Mass Perception. So I did a class as well for Rising Tide on this, and it all started with this movie Gaslight that was made by George Sucker, who actually is part of the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt
Oh,
School is
wow.
not a good thing. And there were actually some people, well, they were maybe not representative of like most people, but they didn't like that I was talking about this movie that I thought was super useful. And I do think that everyone should check out the movie. It's called Gaslight, and it has Ingrid Bergman starring
Oh,
in
I
it.
love Igmig Bergman.
Yeah, she's cool. And
Oh, I'm thinking of the director. My bad. Igmar Bergman. I
Ingrid
wonder
Bergman.
I wonder if they're related.
I don't know. But it goes over basically how this guy to the left psychologically breaks her down using gaslighting techniques, and I think that the movie does it in a really good way. That's like very clear, and that you don't have to do like electroshock therapy, or you don't have to do anything super extreme to get someone to break down that way if they have certain things already happening. In her case, you know, her aunt had died in this house, who's a famous opera singer, and she had traumatic memories of this. She had to leave as a young girl, and this guy convinces her to come back to this house once they're married. We end up finding out that he was the killer of her aunt as well. It's a very useful movie, and so I decided to kind of do a broader theme talking about this. And basically, you know, we are getting a form of gaslighting in our Hollywood entertainment with how the movies that we're watching. And, you know, I did a lot of damage to myself because for a lot of my teenage years, because I was like living in isolated suburbia. So the safest way for me to discover the dark corners of the world, or even just like a little bit of like what is humanity and this sort of thing, like you're going to watch movies to figure out how the stuff works. And I was always interested in dark psychology type subjects, because I had already identified at a young age that there's something really wrong with the world. Like, what's going on? Is this humanity? Like, do we all have to be like this? And why am I not happy then, if like we're all supposed to be like this? But I watched a lot of movies that I realized afterwards they were meant to manipulate me. And even books, I Googled, you know, at a young age, hey, what are good classical books to read? And they suggested these terrible existentialist books that basically at the end of the book, you feel like we're all screwed, we're all ugly, human nature is ugly, just drift. The best thing you can do is like smoke weed or be on whatever kind of drug and just tap out of the game kind
Tune
of.
in, drop out, and
Yeah,
whatnot. Yeah.
that was obviously really soul crushing, especially at a young age. And I was really struggling for a long time to find anything that could that was uplifting. And of course, it's not a coincidence that that sort of thing happens. And nowadays it's gotten to a really extreme point, because at least like during our time, which I think we're probably similar age, we still had like movies that were still kind of, I guess you could say, wholesome, you know, still family oriented and that sort of thing. Nowadays, everything is about just like surviving the apocalypse or end times, or like, you
The
know,
Purge series is what all the soccer moms watch.
oh my God, I've heard what's at I don't want to say it, but at some family reunions, I've heard the parents speaking about what they're watching, and you're like, good God, you watch that with your children?
And also, just a question to kind of be fair with the National Socialists and me being Jewish, the Frankfurt School, it's like all Jews, Hollywood, all Jews as well. Like, what's up with like that? Are they all collectively like this in this confusing state working together, which it seems like to me? That's what drives me crazy. Are they the reformed Satanists in a sense? And because that's, you know, something that I try to be fair in my research.
Well, definitely, you know, there were a lot of Jewish people in the Frankfurt School and in Hollywood too, and I don't know the full reason of like why it happened that way, but I know that the Jewish people who were in the Frankfurt School were not religious.
Right.
They didn't believe in their religion. So when you say that they're Jewish, like the fact that they didn't believe in their religion should count for a lot. And that's not really representative then of the Jewish community that is religious. And again, not to say that there aren't problems with aspects within the religion in terms of practices and everything, but there's also problems in Christianity. There's problems in Islam. In my opinion, you know, none of these institutions are perfect, but I would say that they all have within themselves something very good, very important and sacred as teachings. And that's, I think, what is ultimately getting attacked. You know, forms of corruption are there to corrupt. So we have to identify, well, what is really good in these religious schools, religious teachings that is being carried forward, that is clearly being attacked by this mystery cult endeavor, which is like completely insane. And again, very clearly pro-human sacrifice. That's where it's coming from. It's not coming from, you know, some, you know, a Jewish practice or something like that, which I think sometimes people try to say that sort of thing. So the Frankfurt School, yeah, they're not religious. And a lot of these other people too, like these politicians like Henry Kissinger and so forth, they're not like religious. So again, I don't think that speaks anything to the actual religion. Yeah, with these Hollywood movies, they're done to basically limit our imagination. And you can kind of picture yourself as like a rat in a maze in your mind, because really at the end of the day, all that matters is your mental perception of reality. And now that we have a world where that perception can be manipulated, again, think about during the 19th century where they had all of the magic, the seances, the illusion tricks, which I'm totally going to check out that movie with Tim Roth. I'm very interested in that movie. But
yeah. And it's a Werner Herzog film as well, who's a great director.
And so they always were into this sort of thing. So imagine what they have to play with now with the movie industry, the capability that we have for these grandiose visual projects. And then we're even going to get into like holograms, holographic projections, which I think are already starting to occur to kind of make people think that they're seeing things that they're not actually seeing.
Oh, wow.
But the point being is that if you have a mental perception of what is possible and what is not possible, and also orienting yourself within that as a disempowered person, because that's what a lot of people are saying now. It's like, it's gotten too big. They control everything. There's just no point in trying to resist this. The thing that you have to wonder is, why are they putting so much money into controlling how you think, though, if it doesn't matter how you think? Because they ultimately know that you have to be a participant in this reality that they want to create. They wanted to create a kind of messed up church, it's like, I guess you could say, a messed up form of Egypt, with the pharaohs who are being like worshipped as gods, and the people are like, nothing. They want to return back to a time where we have such a distance between us and the people who are supposed to be like in control, like the Mount Olympus of controllers. The world controllers of Aldous Huxley's world will be the Olympian gods, and that can only work if you don't understand what they are. First of all, you're not able to profile them. You're not able to understand how they think, which is actually really small and petty, obsessively so. And that's why they still constantly are chipping away and working at their projects. But that's because better people have to step up more, because better people tend to not want to spend all of their waking hours plotting this and that, of like how to control this person and how to screw over this person. Most people don't do that. But if you still have to be aware of it at a certain point, especially when we're at a situation now where it's affecting all levels of society. And again, movies are there to clamp your imagination, because if you have control over your imagination, it means you also can understand how to problem solve. You can imagine something that can actually be provided as a solution. However, if you're brainwashed into these imaginary walls and these imaginary limitations, then your mind will just not go there. It's a form of an electric fence that controls you. So movies are not harmless. And I still watch, movies. Like I watched Dune 2, but with the clear purpose of watching it because I know that it's meant for what it's meant for. But you can't just passively watch things and just let it work on you at this point. You have to be aware, if you are going to watch something, that it does not have a good intention almost all of the time at this point.
Yes, there's always some sort of messaging for some sort of action or thinking process. So it's like you just said, it's like they don't need to electrocute the brain through the electrotherapy. They could gaslight us and whatnot through films. And this film, I'll definitely have the link down below to your Substack to go over it. That's absolutely awesome.
For people who want to know more about that technique of gaslighting, they can check out the paper, because I talk about William Sargent, who is the father of Tavistock and MK Ultra. And and I think this is also an important note to tell people so that they don't get too depressed. Even William Sargent, who is like all about using insulin cocktails and sleep deprivation and electroshock and all these kinds of torture techniques to try to create a clean slate for the mind. You have a blank slate that you can just rewrite a new personality for. They were never able to do that. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people who have been MK Ultra who have been, used to assassinate people. That clearly has happened, but you can't create a completely new personality that's stable within someone. And he even said himself that the more you have of the more understanding you have of something, the harder it is to try to twist it and take it away and put something else in, right? So again, that means we have to have a firm foundation. We have to think a little bit more about, well, why do I think this way? Or why did I judge it this way? You have to go through a bit more steps in your thinking of why you're doing whatever you're doing in your life. Why are you thinking whatever you're thinking in your life? Really think, where did it come from? And the more you do that, the more you actually become stronger and more resilient to other people manipulating how your thoughts are being directed. And William Sargent said it was a free will issue, ultimately. How beautiful is that? It's a free will issue that you cannot destroy. And he, of course, says something terrible like, well, we'll always have the hangman's noose or psychiatric institutes for those people. But that's basically a failure upon him, because he couldn't break those people. You can't break someone who has that orientation. So anyone can do that. Anyone can access that within themselves. And that's what we have to take our minds back.
Oh, that'd be a good title for this, Take Our Minds Back. Well, Cynthia, I am so grateful that you're here. I think that is so awesome, and laying the foundation of honesty and truth, the good and whatnot is like right there. Boom, solution right there. Awesome. What can we look out for coming up with you and even with your husband, Matt Ehret. What could we look out for? Where would you like people to go subscribe and visit?
Definitely my Substack, which you've been generously pumping throughout this talk, Through a Glass Darkly by Cynthia Chung. We also have a Rising Tide Foundation Substack, and we have a docu-series there called Escaping Calypso's Island, which we have 3 episodes up so far. In terms of research, I'm just going to pretty much continue this line of series that we've been discussing in terms of the origins of the Mafia Brotherhood, the Freemasons, and it will eventually get into Vatican Gladio of the 20th century, and also the networks that were tied to the Kennedy assassination. These are all tied together, unfortunately. Matt's doing great work on his Poe series. He's going to eventually do a real battle between Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle of the expose Arthur Conan Doyle for what he really was, because Sherlock Holmes was apparently created to destroy what Poe was trying to bring about. Conan Doyle, and there's Jack the Ripper is connected to the story. It's actually really, really messed up. Good for people to know, because Edgar Poe's writings are still out there, and I would recommend, people study them after reading Matt's series.
Oh, wow. And I know he's working on 3 books at once right now. Are those?
God, yeah.
Also, I got the links to your books down below as well. Make sure to grab them. Thank you so much, Cynthia. This has been great. Much love, everybody. Smash that like button, and God bless you.